Hello there. My name's Lisa Michaels, and for the past decade or more, I've been working collaboratively with people in the community to bring more music to more kids. When kids do ensemble making, music making, it brings them together and gives them skills that they might not get anywhere else. Research studies from around the globe have said that when children engage in ensemble music making, they have better academic success, they gain transferable skills, and they improve their mental health. One of the facets that go into that is making sure that when kids play a piece of music, that they see themselves in that. And so today I'm talking about making a choice with underrepresented composers. So first off, I'm based in Halton in Oakville, so I'd like to do land acknowledgement. Halton, as we know it today, is rich in the history and modern traditions of many First Nations and the Métis. From the lands of the Anishinaabe and the Ottawadoran to the Haudenosaunee and the Métis, these lands surrounding the Great Lakes are steeped in Indigenous history. As we stand on these treaty lands, we are in solidarity with our Indigenous brothers and sisters to honor and respect the four directions, lands, waters, plants, animals, ancestors that have come before us, and all the wonderful elements of creation that exist. I want to acknowledge and thank the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nations for being stewards of this traditional territory. So a little bit about me and to self-locate myself. I'm the co-founder and executive director of a nonprofit called Bandology, and we are devoted to more music for more kids via education, collaboration, communities. Founded originally 8 years ago in 2017, the goal of Bandology is to help provide, support, and advocate for music. We provide music opportunities for kids to play and be inspired with band camps in the summer and at March break. With our Play Gig program, we have a free lending library so that kids can have concert band instruments in their home to practice on, and host a wide variety of music workshops in the community, in schools, and with disadvantaged populations. We support music teachers and the music community by providing things like lesson plans, consulting and advice, and we advocate to anyone who will listen to us, whether it's politicians, school boards, trustees, superintendents, other parents, and I speak about these matters to a variety of populations. I'm also a graduate student at Wilfrid Laurier University in the Faculty of Music, and this actual presentation is part of a program in the Master of Arts of Community Music that I'm working on currently. I've given presentations about power of music education at Midwest, at the Ontario Music Educators Association conference 5 times, at the Ohio MEA, and at the Montana. So this is my abstract. For the past several decades, music education in schools, particularly in middle and high school, has focused on traditional wind band structures. Whether wind ensembles, symphonic bands, jazz bands, small ensembles, or other groups, the music education curriculum in Ontario features bands that use typical and traditional Western-style woodwinds, brass, and percussion instruments. For many of us, it's the instruments that we grew up learning in schools. While there is change happening, with some music educators taking advantage of the wide variety of other types of instruments from the dozens and dozens of other countries that are not in Europe or North America, the current reality is that the curriculum and funding in Ontario schools is focused on this Western style of music making. What is more up to individual teachers is the type of repertoire they select for their students. Composers of wind band music are plentiful and varied. However, up until maybe the last 10, 12, 15 years, the composers that most teachers would have available to pick from tended to be male, white, old or maybe dead, and probably American or maybe European from the 15, 16, 1700s. That's not surprising, but things are changing, and so too should the wind band world. There are more and more composers from underrepresented demographics who are writing music, and it is just as interesting and challenging and varied as previous generations. Why then are so many conductors choosing to program music created by people who are not representatives of the students playing that music? Composers and repertoire. So current repertoire, I've had a look at that, and that is, there are lots of resources for that. Typically, if a band here in Ontario, where you would be playing instruments starting grade 6 or 7, so middle school bands and then high school bands, they might be aiming towards playing at a festival, whether that's a local festival, a more regional one, or a national festival like Music Fest. So the festival syllabus is often the first place that teachers can look when they're looking for repertoire. They might be suggestions from supplier. Your local supplier may have ideas. Here in my area, the GTA West, it might be Harpnet, DeLong McQuaid, Cosmo St. John. They may have suggestions on repertoire. It could be recommendations from colleagues. So whether you're a teacher or a community a community ensemble conductor, you may be hearing about different pieces of music that your colleagues are playing and you go, that's what I would like to try. You might stumble across it. It might come up to you in a Facebook posting that you're part of a music teacher group. You might come across it on YouTube. You might hear about it somewhere, maybe. Or you might find it via research papers, whether they're published in a variety of different things or in places like quarterly magazines put out or bi-monthly magazines put out by music education associations. So Pratik Gandhi, fabulous guy, had the pleasure of meeting him a few times. In 2020, he there was an article in the Journal of Canadian Band Association called Canadian Winds, and it was about composer representation. He's a freelance conductor, adjudicator, and clinician. He has a Bachelor of Music and Music Education and a Master of Music in Conducting from Western, and he's currently at work on his PhD up at York University. In reading through the article that he published, there was a lot of information about where he found music as a conductor, as a music educator. He talked about festival lists. Certainly festival syllabus, which are long and varied, are an easy place to look. But he also, in the article, talked about the power dynamics of the influence of festival lists in Canada, how that list has become the list. And then he also talked about how festivals, music publishers, retailers, and school music programs are deeply connected. And the additions of titles to or removals from festival lists have far-reaching impact. So, for example, the Music Fest Canada syllabus. It's used annually by more than 150 bands at its own festival, typically held in May of each year. It's also used by hundreds more attending one of the regional festivals. And this single list impacts the repertoire selections of more than 25,000 band students, as Pratik investigated. So this is a chart out of the same article that talks about the types of representation in festivals. He has studied multiple festivals, but these are sort of the top 7 that tend to be most attended. Music Fest Canada, as I mentioned, is national. So that's the place to look. So if they say that there are 93 works that are held at the festival, and then this chart shows that of that, Canadian representation, so music by Canadian composers, was 52%. Now, that's not unusual. In fact, it should be 52% because Music Fest Canada requires that of the 2 or possibly 3 selections that a band would play at their festival, one has to be by a Canadian composer. If it was under 50%, there'd be a problem because that band shouldn't have been allowed to play in it. Bands may choose also to play more than one Canadian composer, which is why this is more than 50%. But moving along, you can see that demographically, of those composers, only 10% were by women, which means 90% were by men. The population in Canada and across the world is 50-50. Sometimes you'd say it's 51% female, depending on the location. But by far, all the music bands, music ensembles I've come across are absolutely split in terms of representation. You will not find a band that is 90% male and 10% female. That's simply not how demographics work and certainly not how schools work. Moving along, or people of color, 5%. Again, is that representative of a school band? Probably not. And then a woman of color, 3%. I'm surprised it's that high, to be honest, but obviously that's an area that needs to be looked at as well. And then as you go down this particular list, you'll also see that there are festivals that don't require 50% of your music selection to be Canadian. And it drops significantly. Manitoba Band Association, oftentimes Winnipeg's talked about as the central wind band location for homeland for music in Canada. 4% Canadian representation. That's pretty bad given that generally 100% of your band is Canadian. So not to shout out to Manitoba Band Association, they're all pretty low. And then as you move along, you can also see that they're very low in terms of representation by women, by people of color, and by women of color. Another wonderful chart that Pratik has in this article is about composer representation in US festival lists. Pretty heavily white guy. The grand total, I think, of this one works out to 94%. And when we look at Canadian festival lists, again, pretty heavily white guy. This representation works out to about 91%. That number speaks for itself. So after Pratik had put this article together, he was part of the Music Fest Canada in terms of building back better. So he and Dr. Mark Hopkins, who is a conductor and professor at Acadia University in Nova Scotia, very well credentialed with multiple degrees in terms of conducting and music and education. So they talked about building back better, using principles of equity and inclusion to populate the Music Fest Canada concert band syllabus. And this was in spring of 2022. So Pratik's first article was 2020, and then obviously this was an impetus to let's have a look at it. And what better time to look at your syllabus than during the pandemic when hardly any music was being played. So a Music Fest pulled together a repertoire equity committee. The committee was of 13 different people from representational from across the country, different life cycles, different stages in their careers, and they had a two-stage approach to revising the syllabus. There was a subtractive phase where they removed works that they didn't think were appropriate, and there was an additive phase, repopulating the list. And when repopulating the list, they wanted to be more reflective of pedagogical philosophies. So in fact, 34 new titles were added to this syllabus. The Music Fest Canada has a syllabus of recommended pieces that can be played and also the Canadian repertoire list. So it meant that more new pieces were added to that Canadian repertoire list. And there were three principles that Dr. Hopkins and Pratik Gandhi added to sort of focused on as they looked at this. Is the work's composer, title, concept, or source material problematic in some way? That might have been a reason to be subtracted from the list. Does the work use actual musical material from an artist, group, tradition, or culture in which the composer or arranger is an outsider? Does the work attempt to depict or invoke a tradition or a culture of which the composer is an outside, especially using musical tropes and stereotypes? Three great questions as they went through this list. So that leads us to what the current the repertoire lists are. It's April of 2024. And so I ended up using 5 different sources for finding Canadian sources. Canadian sources for finding Canadian representation. So I'm going to have a look at each one of these. The first one is Canadian Wind Band repertoire. So as part of Pratik's doctorate, he's working on a Canadian Wind Band repertoire list. And there's a link for it there. So his list has 44 Canadian composers, of which 6 are women. They're sorted by religion, by region, institution, affiliation, and publisher. They aren't sorted by people of color, Indigenous, or LGBTQ+, but it is a starting point. And so I put these 5 different sources out as a place for music teachers, for band conductors, for community band ensembles to go and find themselves some new repertoire, to repopulate their repertoire list and try something fresh and new. Should this demographic of women, people of color, Indigenous, LGBTQ+, Canadian, young, local be fresh and new? No, but it's a place to start. Another resource is the Ontario Band Provincial Festival. And so the 2024 program had 152 bands from 118 schools, and that festival was held in February of 2024. In terms of what the bands must program to attend this festival, they have to choose it from either the OBA list or the Music Fest syllabus list. And as I've said previously, Music Fest Canada states that one piece of a 2 or potentially 3-piece program must be from a Canadian composer. The program doesn't indicate Canadian composers when you go through this program, but as you look at the syllabus, you'll see that there are 18 different composers on there. Another resource is also by the Ontario Band Association and the Golden Horseshoe Music Festival, which was held in February 2024 and had 103 bands from 80 schools. In terms of programming, it's not a requirement, but they recommend that you use the OBA or Music Fest syllabus. The program does indicate of the pieces the bands are performing, which one are Canadian composers. And of course, Music Fest Nationals. So last year, it would have been May 2023 is the last time they had a national festival. And there were 135 bands from across Canada from 102 schools. And I do know that they tend to be held here in central part of Canada, in Ontario. Niagara Falls, Toronto, Ottawa are frequent locations. And every now and then they are across Canada. But there are bands that come from every single province to come to Music Fest Nationals. The requirement is you must play one piece from a Canadian composer and one piece from the syllabus. So the syllabus has a wide variety of pieces on it, and some of them are Canadian and some of them are, many of them are not. And you can choose to play both. There are actually 28 Canadian composers on the 2024 syllabus. And then at Bandology, the nonprofit that I helped to co-found 8 years ago, in the past few years, we've worked on composer spotlights with some of our summer staff who are music students or music educators themselves. We pulled together 57 composers who are profiled with URL links to their own personal website, to the music they've made, or to music performances. We featured 24 Canadian composers. We had 38 female composers. There are 30 people of color composers, 2 Indigenous composers, and 3 that were self-identified as LGBTQ plus composers. There may be many more, but we went to their web pages and saw how they self-identified. So this is another place that music educators can go and band conductors can go to find some composers that are different from the ones that they've been playing many, many times. And then in terms of international sources, there are many of them, but these particular ones have been recommended to me. I am part of a music educators group on Facebook, and I said, hey, where does everybody find sources for composers? And these ones were recommended. The Wind Repertoire Project is by far the biggest, has the biggest impact. There's an ability for a wide variety of searches. First off, it could be by level. That should be 100 to 600. It's not 6,000. It has 19, you can self-select 19 different types of ensembles. There are 46 types of form and style of band rep, whether that meant lyrical or soundtracks or chorales. And there were 77 categories of composers, broken down by nationality. A lot of them are by nationality, but also female, African American, Black, Asian American, Native American, Hispanic, LGBTQ plus, and Pulitzer Prize winning composers, which was an interesting one. Lots of levers in this one to pull back and forth and to have a really good search. And I'll just go back. And obviously, Canadian composers is an option there. The Institute for Composer Diversity, it also has the ability for a variety of searches, and it gives more options in terms of gender identity. So you can choose male or woman, sexual orientation. BIPOC is broken out into 8 different demographic groups. The country of residence, although not the nationality of the composers, it allows you to sort whether it's a living composer or a deceased composers, and then you can also have an option for different types of ensembles. Colorful Music, which has been created by Dr. Jodie Blackshaw out of Australia, is another wonderful source, has a different way of looking at it. She and her associates have reached out and talked to different conductors from across the world and asked them to make options of pre-selected programs. So each of these pre-selected programs, which even feature local conductors like our very own at Laurier, Dr. Cynthia Johnson-Turner, each of them has put together a program that includes 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 12 different pieces that are identified by composer, country, the actual level of the piece, publisher, and then there's a link to a video so you can see it. This particular database can be sorted by beginner and advanced wind bands, and it also has examples of pieces with predominance in melody, harmony, rhythm, texture, timbre, and concept. And We Were Heard is another option, and it has 3 types of searches. It can be searched by level, from 100 to 600. You can also search by flexible and adaptable music. And coming out of the pandemic, and certainly the tail end of the pandemic, flex band was the name of the game. How can we adjust for the needs of our bands? And flex band makes a big difference. It also allows you to search by orchestra. So next steps. The whole point of this project was to investigate what is out there and available, but to lead toward a new program. How can you go ahead and change things up in your ensemble? So you've got to make a choice. You've got to decide what you're going to choose. You've got to figure out how you're going to choose it. You'll be looking at it by grade level in terms of level 100 to 600. Flex band may be an option for what you need. Types of music, festival, marches, lyrical soundtracks, traditional jazz, chorales, on and on and on. Often you want a balanced program, so you want a little bit of everything. You also want to sort of identify pieces that are of interest and attraction to the students in your band. So at Bandology, we run a summer band camp program, and traditionally we have music directors, lots of wonderful music educators and band conductors who come in and they bring their own music. But they weren't always maybe representative of the way we wanted to do things. And so now I'm shaking it up. So for 2024, for our summer band camp program, and its 8th year, we're going to be purchasing and providing repertoire. And so I sat down with my team and we looked at different pieces that might be options. So I probably listened to 20 or 30, maybe even more different pieces. And so this is a potential playlist that I may select to have our bands play this summer. It's not to say they would play everything, that this would be our library, and that the music directors could then pick and choose. And so we looked at what we needed. So grade level is 0.5 to 1 to, there's a few 1.5s covered up by my head there. And we made sure that it was much more diverse than it could have been. It's been my pleasure to meet a few people on this list. We're starting with William Owens, but I've also met Randall Standridge, who came up to Canada last spring and basically programmed a Pride concert, and it was fabulous to see it. Kate Nashimura is sort of the young, hot conductor these days, and rightly so. She is, for us, she is local. She's young, she's a person of color, she's a woman, she's Canadian. Those are hard to find. Jody Blackshaw has a wonderful piece called Whirlwind, which incorporates the other unique elements. The founder of Call for Music, and she's from Australia. Jay Coles is another young American composer, a Black American, and he's writing for Flex Band. Jennifer Jolie is another one we chose. She's a woman from the United States. And then Matt Neufeld, who's a personal friend, writing all sorts of great pieces. He's an elementary school teacher, so he gets young bands. He's Canadian, out of Winnipeg, and this particular piece is for Flex Band. Carol Britton Chambers is a woman out of Texas. This piece is for Flex Band, but it also incorporates some clapping elements, which is kind of fun. It adds a level that maybe other participants can join in, whether it's younger children in our camps who don't play instruments, or maybe it's even the audience. And then our last piece is a neat piece out of from a Japanese composer who's arranged music for anime. And this particular one had interesting solos. So this is a particular program piece that this is a particular program that we might decide to use for our band camp, or this may inspire other music educators to try out something different. So my recommendation for next steps is to be thoughtful. If you are sharing your band recommendation and it's all white guys, maybe you need to think again. Be deliberate in who you're picking and choosing. There are lots of different options out there. And the fact that this is one particular, you have a particular favorite composer, or 6 favorite composers, or 10 favorite composers, well, maybe it's time to mix them up and put in some new favorites. Ask for student recommendations and feedback. Just put it out there and say, hey class, what have you been listening to? What do you want to try? Inspire your music students to go and listen to band music. That would be kind of fun. And ask for their recommendations. When you're putting your program together, read, research, and listen. Listen to the repertoire. There's so many different options out there. Do your research. Put in the time. Maybe this is a summer project for you to have a look and try something different and do different things. And then read the different options that are out there. I'm hoping to not only submit this particular video for my program in the Masters of Community Music at Laurier, but also I'm going to put it out there online. And if you are watching this video and you've gotten all the way to the end, share your recommendations for repertoire with me. It's lisa@bandology.ca, and I would love that if people were inspired to do so, that I could hear more suggestions. So my concluding thoughts to you, listeners, viewers, is to make good choices. Composers who've worked so hard deserve it. Your young musicians deserve to have some diversity, and so do you. Thank you for listening to the presentation. So here are my citations. And then there's also online resources, which I presented out there. I'll make these available online at bandology.ca as well. But thank you so much. I appreciate your time and attention. It's been a real pleasure to pull this together, and I hope that I've inspired someone out there to just be more thoughtful and to take that option, to make that choice to program underrepresented composers. Thank you very much.